The agreed sum, Your Grace.
The contract hit the table like a death sentence. A single sheet of paper. A name written at the top. Hers. Lucinda Hale pressed her fingers against the cold window pane and watched the man she had loved for 3 years shake hands with a stranger in the courtyard below. No tears, no argument. Just a quiet, clean transaction. Her fiancé, Lord Percival Stowe, had just sold her. Like land, like livestock, like something that had no feelings, no voice, no worth. The stranger turned and looked up. His eyes found hers immediately, as if he had known exactly where she would be standing. Duke Crestian of Velmoor. The name alone made drawing rooms go silent. They called him cold, ruthless. A man who buried 2 stewards and 3 business rivals in the same year and did not lose a single night of sleep. He had never been seen at a ball, never attended a supper, never smiled in public. Not once. And now he owned her future. Lucinda did not step back from the window. She straightened her spine and held his gaze until he was the one who looked away. She did not know then what that small act of defiance would cost her, or what it would slowly, painfully awaken in the coldest chest in all of England. But you already know this is not going to be a simple story. Could you have survived what Lucinda was about to walk into? Drop your thoughts and tell us what beautiful part of the world you are watching from. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe. There is so much more coming. The carriage door slammed shut behind Lucinda Hale before she had even lifted her skirts properly off the ground. No farewell. No embrace from her mother, who stood at the top of the stone steps with dry eyes and clasped hands, watching her only daughter be driven away like an unwanted parcel. Her younger brother Tobias had tried to run after the carriage. She had seen him through the small rear window, his boots kicking up gravel, his mouth open in a shout she could not hear. 2 footmen had caught him by the arms and pulled him back. That image, her brother struggling, her mother standing still, burned itself behind Lucinda's eyes and refused to leave. She turned to face forward. Across from her sat a man she had never been introduced to. Not the Duke himself, a representative. A thin, sharp-faced solicitor named Mr. Otwell Briggs, who held a leather satchel on his lap and had not looked at her once since she entered the carriage. He was reading documents, turning pages, licking his thumb to move to the next sheet, as if she were simply cargo to be delivered and logged. "How far is Velmore?" Lucinda asked. Mr. Briggs turned to another page. "Half a day's ride, Miss Hale. Perhaps more, depending on the road." "And what can you tell me about the Duke?" He finally looked up. His small grey eyes studied her face for a moment, then returned to his papers. "Only that he expects punctuality, silence and obedience. In that order." Lucinda folded her hands in her lap. "How very charming." Mr. Briggs did not respond. She looked out the window instead. The countryside rolled past in long, quiet stretches of green and grey. Beautiful, if you were free to enjoy it. Suffocating, if you were being carried toward a life you had not chosen. She thought of Percival, of the way he had held her hand in the garden just 4 months ago, and told her she was the only woman he had ever wanted to marry. She had believed him completely. She had been so certain of his love that she had never once questioned the slowness of their engagement, the delays, the excuses, the missed visits. She understood now. He had been buying time, spending money he did not have while searching for a buyer who could clear his debts, and he had found one. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm until the sting pulled her back to the present. Grief was a luxury she could not afford right now. She needed her wits. She needed to understand exactly what she was walking into before those iron gates of Velmore closed behind her. The estate came into view late in the afternoon. It was not what she expected. She had pictured something grim and decaying, all crumbling stone and strangled ivy, befitting a man with such a dark reputation. Instead, Velmore Hall rose from the landscape with cold, deliberate authority. Every line was precise, every hedge trimmed to a sharp edge. The stone was dark but unbroken. The windows were tall and clean and gave nothing away. It was a house that had been built not to welcome anyone, but to remind them of their smallness. The carriage rolled through the gates and stopped at the entrance. No one came out to greet her. Mr. Briggs stepped down first and gestured for her to follow. A housekeeper appeared at the top of the stairs, a broad woman with silver hair pulled severely back and a ring of keys at her waist. She looked Lucinda over once, from boots to collar, and said nothing. "Mrs. Petch will show you to your rooms," Mr. Briggs announced, then turned and walked back toward the carriage without another word. Lucinda stared after him. "That is all? No introduction? No meeting with the Duke?" Mrs. Petch spoke from the top step, her voice low and flat. "His Grace does not receive guests on arrival. You will be informed when he wishes to see you." "I am not a guest," Lucinda said quietly. Mrs. Petch looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not quite pity, but something adjacent to it. "No," she agreed at last. "I suppose you are not. Come inside, Miss Hale. The evening air is sharp." Her rooms were on the east wing, far from the main hall. They were clean, well furnished, and completely impersonal. No flowers, no books left out, no small signs that anyone had thought about who might sleep here. Just a bed, a writing desk, a fireplace, and 4 walls that told her nothing. Lucinda sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the fire. She didn't cry. She refused. Instead, she counted what she knew. She had no money of her own. Her family name, while respectable, carried no real power in this part of England. She had no allies inside Velmore Hall, not yet. She did not know the terms of the arrangement beyond what her mother had told her in a single horrible conversation 3 days ago. Percival had debts, crushing ones. The Duke had offered to clear every last penny in exchange for a wife of gentle birth who could manage his household and attend public functions without embarrassing him. That was all she was supposed to be. A function. A fixture. She stood up from the bed, crossed to the writing desk and sat down. She pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write a letter to Tobias. She did not know if it would reach him. She did not know if she was permitted to send correspondence freely, but she wrote it anyway, because doing something was the only way she knew how to breathe inside a cage. She had just signed her name when a knock came at the door. Not a servant's knock. Too deliberate, too measured. She stood. The door opened before she could speak. He filled the frame in a way that had nothing to do with physical size, though he was tall and broad through the shoulders, and carried himself with the kind of stillness that comes not from ease, but from absolute control. Duke Crestian of Velmoor looked at her across the room with eyes the color of winter slate, and said nothing for a long moment. Lucinda did not move. He stepped inside. His gaze moved to the letter on the desk, then back to her face. "You write quickly," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, like the first warning rumble before a storm. "I find it helps me think," she answered. He looked at her as if that response was not what he had prepared for. "Mrs. Petch tells me you arrived without complaint." Would complaining have changed anything? Another pause. Longer this time. He walked slowly toward the window and looked out at the darkening grounds below. No. Then there was no point in it, Lucinda said. He turned to look at her again. Fully. The way people rarely looked at anyone, without social pretense or polite distraction, just direct and unblinking. You are not what I expected, he said. Nor are you, she replied. He left without another word. The door closed quietly behind him. No slam. No dramatic exit. Just silence, sudden and complete. Lucinda let out the breath she had been holding for the last 2 minutes and sat back down at the desk. Her hand was trembling slightly. Not from fear. From something she could not yet name. She did not sleep well. The house made sounds at night that no one warned her about. Not frightening sounds, no rattling chains or howling wind through cracked walls, but deliberate ones. Footsteps in the corridor at 2 a.m, slow and even, moving past her door and continuing down the hall. A door closing somewhere below, the low creak of floorboards under steady weight. Someone in this house did not sleep either. By dawn, Lucinda had made a decision. She would not spend her days locked in these rooms waiting to be summoned. She would learn the house. She would learn its rhythms and its people. Knowledge was the only currency she had, and she intended to spend it wisely. She dressed without calling for a maid, pinned her hair herself, and walked out into the corridor before the household was fully awake. Velmore Hall was even larger than it appeared from outside. Long corridors led to wider ones. Staircases branched in unexpected directions. Portraits lined the walls on the upper floor. Generations of Velmore men, all with the same dark eyes and closed expressions, as if smiling had been bred out of the line deliberately. She walked slowly, studying each face. A young footman nearly collided with her at the bottom of the east staircase. He stepped back, startled, gripping a tray of polishing cloths. He was young, barely 17, with copper-red hair and a scatter of freckles across his nose. His eyes went wide when he saw her. "Miss Hale, forgive me. I did not expect anyone in this corridor at this hour." "It is quite all right," she said. "What is your name?" He blinked, as if the question itself was unusual. "Pip, miss. Pippindray. I tend to the silver and the lower hall." "Well, Pip, can you tell me where the morning room is?" He hesitated, looked down the corridor, then back at her. "His Grace takes his morning meal in the east dining room, miss. The morning room is kept for guests. Are you certain you would not prefer a tray sent up to your rooms?" "Quite certain," she said pleasantly. "Lead on." Pip looked deeply uncertain, but he led on. The morning room had tall windows that caught the early light and held it. It was the warmest room she had found so far, not in temperature, but in feeling. A small table was set near the window. A bookshelf ran along the south wall, its shelves only half full, as if someone had once been building a collection and then stopped. She sat down and asked Pip for tea and whatever bread was available. He disappeared with the expression of someone who expected to be reprimanded for this later. She was halfway through her second cup when the door opened. It was not a servant. Duke Crestian stood in the doorway of his own morning room, dressed for the day, but without the formal stiffness of the previous evening. His coat was darker, simpler. His expression was not warm exactly, but it was less carefully arranged than before. He looked at her sitting at his window table, with her tea and her composed posture, and something crossed his face too quickly to read. "This room is not prepared for regular use," he said. "I noticed. I prepared it myself. I hope that is acceptable." He entered the room and stood near the bookshelf. You were not given leave to wander the house. I was not told I could not, she replied. She kept her tone even, not challenging, not apologetic, factual. If there are specific areas that are restricted, I would appreciate being told directly. I am not in the habit of stumbling into places I am not permitted to be, but I cannot follow rules I have not been given. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed to the table, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down. Lucinda kept her expression neutral, though internally she had not expected that. You will take your meals here, he said. It is more practical than the dining room. Will you be joining me? Occasionally, she nodded. Then I will need to know your preferences, whether you take milk, whether conversation at breakfast irritates you or not. Small things matter in a household. He studied her face. You are managing me. I am learning you, she corrected gently. There is a difference. A silence stretched between them. Outside the window, 2 groundsmen were crossing the lower lawn, their breath misting in the cold morning air. A horse was being led from the stables. The world outside moved normally, indifferently, while inside this small room, something was taking shape that neither of them had planned for. I take no milk, the Duke said at last, and I do not require conversation before 9 o'clock. Understood, Lucinda said, and poured him tea. He looked at the cup for a moment, then picked it up. They sat in silence, which was comfortable in a way that surprised her. She had expected coldness or contempt, or the specific cruelty of a man who needed to remind a woman of her reduced circumstances. What she found instead was someone who seemed almost relieved not to be performing for anyone. It made her curious, which was dangerous. After breakfast, she was introduced formally to the rest of the household staff. Mrs. Petch conducted the introductions with brisk efficiency. There was Holt, the head butler, a quiet man in his 50s with careful eyes and an economy of movement that suggested long years of professional discipline. There was Cook, a wide, red-faced woman named Aggie Turnbull, who assessed Lucinda in about 4 seconds and apparently approved, because she offered her a biscuit immediately. There was a senior lady's maid, Dressy Fawn, young and watchful, who would attend to Lucinda's personal needs. And there were others: hall boys, groundsmen, laundry maids, a groom named Stolwick who ran the stables with military precision. Lucinda greeted each of them by name and thanked them. She noticed, not for the first time, that this appeared to surprise people. She spent the afternoon exploring the parts of the house she had been tacitly given access to. She found the library on the 2nd floor, a genuine library, not a decorative one, with shelves floor to ceiling and a rolling ladder on iron rails. She stood in the middle of it and felt, for one small moment, something close to gladness. She was pulling a volume from the shelf when she heard voices below the window. 2 men in the courtyard. One was the Duke, coatless despite the cold, speaking with controlled force to a man Lucinda had not yet seen in the household. This man was older, heavy-set, well-dressed in a way that suggested money but not refinement. He was gesturing broadly. The Duke was not. The Duke stood absolutely still, which somehow made him a more powerful presence. She could not hear the words, but she could read the Duke's expression from above, and it was not coldness she saw there. It was something beneath coldness, something carefully buried. The heavy-set man laughed at something, clapped the Duke on the shoulder with the familiarity of old connection, and walked back toward the stables. The Duke looked up, straight at her window, straight at her face, again, exactly as he had in the courtyard of her family home the day of the transaction. She did not step back. He held her gaze for 3 long seconds, Then he looked away, turned, and walked back inside. Lucinda closed the book she had not opened and stood very still in the library. That man below, the visitor, whoever he was, had unsettled the Duke. She was certain of it, and the Duke did not look like a man who unsettled easily. She filed it away and said nothing. That evening a letter arrived for her. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Tobias. Her brother had managed to write before she could even send hers. She pressed the envelope against her chest for a moment before opening it. It was short, barely a paragraph. He had clearly written it in a hurry. Lucy, I know what they did. I am not going to pretend this is acceptable. But I need you to be careful. Father received a second visitor yesterday, a man from the north, asking questions about the arrangement. Something is wrong beyond what we were told. Stay watchful. Write when you can. I am coming to visit the moment I am legally able. Do not trust easily. Your brother Toby. Lucinda read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and pressed it into the inside pocket of her skirt. Something wrong beyond what we were told. She sat by the fire that night and thought about the man in the courtyard, the Duke's buried expression, the document Mr. Briggs had been reading in the carriage, the one he had angled away from her view when she glanced at it, the way Mrs. Petch had paused too long before answering her question about whether she was free to walk the grounds alone. There were layers here. Beneath the transaction, beneath the Duke's silence, beneath the cold precision of Velmore Hall, something else was moving. And no one had thought to warn her. Because no one had thought she would notice. That, she decided quietly, looking into the fire, was the first mistake anyone here had made about her. It would not be the last. The visitor's name was Lord Gareth Stull. Lucinda learned this from Pip, who had the useful quality of being young enough to talk freely when someone listened to him with genuine interest. She had found him polishing the lower hall candlesticks the following morning and asked him, carefully, about the man she had seen in the courtyard. Pip's hands slowed on the brass. Lord Stull has been coming to Velmore for about 2 years, miss. Always unannounced. Always stays no longer than a few hours. He glanced down the corridor, then lowered his voice. The staff don't like when he comes. Cook locks the pantry. Holt counts the silver after he leaves. Why? Pip looked at her with the wide, honest eyes of someone who knows more than he is sure he should share. He smiles too much, miss. Men who smile that much in this house usually want something. She thanked him and walked away with more questions than she had arrived with. Lord Gareth Stull. She turned the name over in her mind. He was not a man she had ever encountered in London society, which was itself unusual for someone who dressed and carried himself with such obvious wealth. Men of that standing appeared at balls, at Parliament sessions, at the clubs her father used to mention. They left footprints everywhere. The fact that she did not recognize him from a single drawing-room or dinner table meant either that he moved in very different circles, or that he moved deliberately in the shadows of them. Neither possibility was comforting. That afternoon, Lucinda requested a meeting with the Duke. She did not wait to be summoned. She asked Holt directly, standing in the main corridor with her hands folded and her chin level, and Holt, after a brief pause that told her he was recalibrating his understanding of her, went to inquire. She was received in the Duke's study within the hour. It was a serious room, dark wood panelling, a fireplace large enough to stand in, shelves stacked with ledgers and correspondence rather than decorative volumes, maps on the wall, several of them, pinned and annotated, a large desk covered in ordered papers. The Duke stood when she entered, which she had not expected. "You requested this meeting," he said. Not a question. I did. She took the seat across from his desk, without being invited to, and watched his expression register that. I want to understand the terms of this arrangement properly, not the version Mr. Briggs summarized in a moving carriage, but the actual terms. He sat down slowly. That is a direct request. I am a direct person. You may as well know that now. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one, passing through without permission. He opened the top drawer of his desk, withdrew a document, and placed it in front of her. She read every word. The arrangement was more complex than her mother had described. Yes, Percival's debts had been cleared, £17,000 in total, a number that made her stomach turn when she saw it written plainly. But there were additional clauses. The Duke required a wife of public standing because he was under social and legal pressure from a collective of estate creditors, men who had apparently decided that a bachelor duke with no heir and a reputation for coldness was an unstable investment. A wife changed the optics. A wife suggested permanence, roots, continuity. She was not just a social fixture, she was a shield. "You are being threatened," she said, looking up from the document. The Duke's jaw tightened slightly. That is one way to read it. Is there another? She set the document down. These creditors, they are not simply financial men. Some of these names are political. Lord Bain, Sir Fenwick Crail. These men sit in Parliament. She paused. And Lord Gareth Stull. He is listed here as a secondary claimant on the Velmore northern property. The silence in the room changed quality entirely. The Duke looked at her with an expression that was no longer simply unreadable. It was sharp, assessing, as if he had just seen something he had not anticipated and was deciding rapidly what to do about it. "You recognize those names," he said. "My father was a solicitor before his health failed," she replied. "I grew up reading documents like this one. I could not help it. They were always on the dining table." He stood and walked to the fireplace. He stood with his back to her for a long moment, one hand on the mantelpiece. "Stolly wants the northern property," he said at last, his voice lower now, stripped of its formal distance. "He has wanted it for 11 years. It borders his own land, and he has made 4 separate legal attempts to claim it. All failed. My father blocked each one." He turned. "When my father died, Stull moved faster. He found men willing to pressure the estate financially. The creditors you saw listed are his instruments, not independent investors. So he engineered your financial vulnerability deliberately," Lucinda said, "and your marriage to me was meant to stabilize the estate publicly and legally enough to block his next move." Yes. She absorbed this. And Percival? Lord Stowe? Was he connected to Stull? The Duke looked at her steadily. Yes. The word landed like a stone in still water. She felt its weight spread outward through her chest, slow and cold. Percival had not simply sold her to clear his own debts. He had been directed to find her, chosen her specifically, delivered her here as part of a plan she had never been told existed. She had not simply been betrayed by a weak man who loved money more than her. She had been selected, positioned, used. "How long have you known about Percival's connection to Stull?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She was quietly proud of that. "Long enough," the Duke said. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That is not an answer." Before the arrangement was finalized. She stood up from the chair. Not in anger, at least not the visible kind, in the deliberate way of someone who needs to be on their feet in order to think clearly. She walked to the window and looked out at the grounds. "Then you used me as well," she said. not accusing, just true. The Duke did not deny it. That, strangely, was the thing that made her trust him a fraction more than she had a moment ago. A lesser man would have deflected. He simply stood in the silence of what he had done and let it exist between them. "I will not pretend the arrangement was built on honesty," he said, "but I intend to honor its terms fully, and I will not allow you to come to harm under my roof. That is not a small promise in the current circumstances." She turned from the window. "No, it is not." She looked at him directly. "I want to help." He frowned. "You are not in a position to—" "I am in a better position than you think," she said, cutting across him, which she suspected no one did often. "I grew up reading legal documents. I know these men's names. I am also, as of this arrangement, your wife in the eyes of the law and society. That gives me access to rooms and conversations that you cannot enter without raising suspicion." She paused. "Lord Stull does not yet know what I am capable of. That is an advantage, one that disappears the moment you leave me sitting in a morning room pouring tea." The Duke stared at her. Outside, the wind moved through the grounds with a low, even sound. "You are remarkable," he said. It came out as if it surprised him. "I am practical," she replied. "There is a difference, though in my experience, people rarely notice one from the other." That evening, at precisely 7:15, Lord Gareth Stull arrived again at Velmore Hall, unannounced. As Pip had said, he always came. He was shown into the front drawing room and offered refreshment by a visibly tense Holt. Lucinda was ready. She had changed into a composed, well-fitted gown and seated herself in the drawing room before Stull arrived, a book open on her lap, a cup of tea on the table beside her, the very picture of a settled, comfortable mistress of the house. When Stull walked in and found her there, the flicker of surprise on his face was so brief that only someone watching for it would have caught it. She caught it. "Lord Stull," she said pleasantly, setting down her book. "What a lovely, if unexpected, visit." He recovered smoothly. He was good at that. His smile returned like a curtain drawn back over a window, revealing nothing behind it. "Miss Hale, or I suppose I should say, Your Grace. Forgive me, I was not aware His Grace had taken on company so quickly." "Company," she repeated, with a small, warm smile that meant absolutely nothing friendly. "How interesting that you would choose that word." Stull sat across from her without being invited. He was a man accustomed to taking up space in other people's rooms. He was perhaps 50, with broad, handsome features going slightly to ruin, and the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades measuring every person he met for weakness. He found none in her face. That bothered him. She could see it. The Duke entered the room 4 minutes later. He looked at Lucinda. She gave him the smallest, most composed nod. Something moved in his expression, not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition, like a man who has been carrying a weight alone for a long time and has just been offered, unexpectedly, another pair of hands. The meeting with Stull lasted 40 minutes. Lucinda said very little and observed everything. The way Stull's questions circled always back to the northern property. The way he laughed at moments that were not funny, filling silences he found threatening with noise. The way he watched the Duke's hands when he spoke, looking for tension, for tells. What he did not do was watch hers. When he left, the hall felt cleaner. Holt counted the silver. Nothing was missing, but Lucinda sat at the writing desk in her room that night and wrote down every single word Stull had said, in order, from memory. Then she wrote the words he had almost said, the questions he had started and redirected, the names he had mentioned in passing, as if casually, which were never casual. She underlined 3 of them. Then she wrote a second letter to Tobias. This one had questions in it, specific ones, about a land dispute in the northern counties 11 years ago, about a solicitor named Crale, and about what, exactly, their father might have known about any of it before his health had failed so suddenly. She sealed it, held it in her hands, and thought about the Duke standing at the fireplace earlier that day, his voice stripped of its formal armor, telling her the truth because she had simply required it of him. She thought about Percival's handshake in the courtyard, clean and quick and utterly without feeling. She thought about her brother running after the carriage, boots on gravel, arms caught by strangers. She set her jaw, walked to the door, and called quietly for Pip. "Can you get this out tonight?" she asked, pressing the letter into his hands. Pip looked at it, looked at her. "Yes, miss," he said, with the quiet certainty of someone who had just decided whose side he was on. 3 days passed before the next move was made. Not by Stull, not by the Duke, by Lucinda. Tobias's reply came faster than she expected, which told her he had been doing his own digging before she even asked. She read it standing in the library, still in her morning dress, and by the time she reached the 3rd paragraph, her hands had gone very still. Their father had not simply been a solicitor with failing health. He had been the solicitor who handled the original land boundary agreement between the Velmore estate and the Stull holdings 11 years ago. He had been the one to draft the document that denied Stull's first claim on the northern property. And 6 months after that document was filed, her father had suffered his first collapse. Tobias had written 2 words at the bottom of the page, underlined twice. Not a coincidence. Lucinda sat down on the library floor, right there between the shelves, because her legs had simply decided the news was too heavy to carry standing. She pressed the letter flat against her knee and stared at it. Her father's illness, her family's slow financial ruin. Percival found her in that particular season, when her dowry was modest and her family's desperation was at its quietest, most invisible peak. All of it was arranged. All of it is deliberate. She was not simply a woman sold by a weak man. She was the final piece of a plan that had been built around her family for over a decade. She was on her feet again in less than a minute. She found the Duke in the east courtyard, overseeing the inspection of a newly arrived shipment of fencing materials for the lower grounds. He was speaking with Stalwick, the head groom, in the practical tones of a man who ran his estate with genuine attention rather than aristocratic distance. He looked up when he heard her cross the cobblestones. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. His expression did not collapse or dramatize. It simply set itself, harder, into something colder than his usual stillness. He read it a second time. Then he handed it back to her. "Your father drafted the boundary agreement," he said. "Yes. Which means Stull has reason to believe your family holds knowledge of the original filing that could legally complicate his current claim." "Yes," she said again, "which means I was not just brought here to stabilize your public image." She held his gaze. "I was brought here to be kept somewhere. Stull could watch me without appearing to." The Duke turned and dismissed Stalwick with a word. They were alone in the courtyard. "Percival was feeding information to Stull," the Duke said, low and direct. "I suspected it, but could not prove it. If your father's connection to the original boundary filing is documented, Stull may believe there are additional papers, notes, correspondence, something that could damage his legal standing if it surfaced." "Is he right to believe that?" Lucinda asked. "I do not know. My father never told me the full details of the dispute." He paused. "But if such papers exist, They are likely here. My father kept everything. Every letter, every filed copy, every amendment. It is all in the lower archive, which has not been opened since his death. Lucinda stared at him. You have an archive. It is less organized than it sounds. Take me there. He looked at her for one moment, measuring something. Then he turned and walked inside, and she followed. The lower archive was reached through a narrow door behind the main staircase, down a short flight of stone steps, into a room that smelled of old paper and cold stone. It was not dark. 2 high, narrow windows let in thin afternoon light, but it was dense. Shelves on every wall, each one loaded with bundled documents tied with different colored ribbons indicating decade and category. Wooden crates stacked along the floor. A long table in the center with a single oil lamp. Lucinda stood in the middle of the room and felt a complicated emotion move through her. This was her world, in a strange way. Organized information, history pressed flat between papers, the language of her childhood, late evenings watching her father sort documents by lamplight, his patient hands moving through years of other people's lives. What are we looking for? The Duke asked. Anything from 11 years ago is related to the northern boundary, she said. Correspondence between your father and mine specifically. Filed copies of the original agreement and any amendments, notes made after the fact. They worked side by side in silence for nearly 2 hours. It was not an unpleasant silence. It was the kind that exists between people focused on a shared purpose, productive and unforced. At one point, the Duke reached across her to retrieve a bundle from the shelf behind her, and she caught the faint scent of wood smoke and cold air that seemed to simply be part of him. She moved slightly to give him room and said nothing. At the end of the second hour, she found it. A thin bundle tied with brown ribbon, labeled in a hand she did not recognize as the Duke's father's. She untied it slowly and spread the contents on the table. 3 letters. 2 of them from her father to the late Duke. One at the bottom from a third party she did not immediately recognize, addressed to her father alone, written in a cramped and urgent hand. She read it. Then she read it again. Crestian, she said. She had not used his given name before. It came out before she could select a more formal alternative, and she did not take it back. He came to stand beside her at the table and read over her shoulder. The letter was from a man named Sir Aldous Wren Briggs, no relation to Mr. Otwell Briggs, who had been a Parliament clerk at the time of the original boundary filing. He had written to her father in a state of clear anxiety. His letter described a meeting he had accidentally overheard between Lord Stull and a senior land commissioner, in which Stull had discussed paying to have the original boundary document altered after filing. The alteration had apparently been caught and blocked by her father before it could take effect, and Sir Aldous had written to warn him that Stull knew who had caught it, and was, in his exact words, not the kind of man who forgets a debt of that nature. Her father had received this letter 6 weeks before his first collapse. Lucinda set the letter down on the table very carefully, as if it were made of something that could break. The Duke did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was quiet and deliberate. He tried to have your father silenced. And when that did not fully work, she said, just as quietly, he ruined him slowly instead. The practice lost clients. The family lost income. My brother's education was cut short. My dowry shrank. She paused, and then Percival appeared, perfectly timed, and I was grateful for the attention. She stopped speaking, not because she could not continue, but because she needed one moment to feel the full shape of it before she packed it away into the part of herself she kept functional and operational. The Duke was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not a pity. Something more careful than that. More complicated. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. "Are you apologizing for your part in it, or for all of it?" "Both," he said, "though I can only fix one." She picked up the letter again. "Then let us fix the one we can." She looked at him steadily. "This letter is evidence. Not enough on its own, but enough to open a formal inquiry into the original filing, which would freeze Stull's current claim while the review is conducted. We need a solicitor we can trust, which is not Mr. Briggs, and we need to move before Stull realizes what we have found." "He will know we found something," the Duke said. "He has someone inside this house. I have suspected it for months." Lucinda's eyes moved to the door, then back to him. "Then we give them something to report. Something that sends Stull in the wrong direction, while the real document reaches the right hands." She set the letter down. "Do you trust me?" He looked at her across the table in the dim archive room, surrounded by the pressed weight of years and consequence, and she could see him deciding. Not quickly, not carelessly. "Yes," he said. The word was plain and undecorated, and she believed it entirely. "Good," she said, "because what I am about to suggest will require both of us to be very convincing, and neither of us to lose our nerve." Outside, above them, Velmore Hall moved through its evening routines. Fires were lit, lamps were turned up. Somewhere in the house, someone was listening for information to carry to Lord Gareth Stull. They were about to give that person exactly what Lucinda wanted them to hear. The plan was simple enough to be believable, and dangerous enough to require nerve. Lucinda would let it be known, through carefully placed conversation within earshot of the right people, that she had found nothing of significance in the lower archive, that the papers were largely estate accounts and old correspondence of no legal weight, that she had advised the Duke to focus his energies on renegotiating with the creditors directly, rather than pursuing any historical legal avenue. This would reach Stull within a day. 2 at most. And while Stull relaxed, certain the document trail was cold, the real letter from Sir Aldous would be quietly copied, witnessed, and dispatched to a solicitor in London named Mr. Carver Holt, a man the late Duke had trusted, and whose name Lucinda had found written in the margin of one of her father's old letters as someone honest in a dishonest profession. The Duke confirmed he knew the name. He also confirmed, without being asked, that Mr. Otwell Briggs would not be told anything. Lucinda began the performance at breakfast, speaking to Dressy Fawn while the maid arranged her hair, loudly enough for the hall boy outside the door to hear clearly. She spoke with mild frustration, as a woman who had spent 2 fruitless hours in a dusty archive and found nothing worth the effort. She mentioned the cold, the poor organization, the tedium of old estate records. She said she had suggested to the Duke that legal history was a dead end, and that a direct financial arrangement with the creditors was the more intelligent path. She watched Dressy's hands pause for just a fraction of a second in her hair. There it was. Not Dressy herself. Dressy was loyal and straightforward, but Dressy talked to the other maids at supper, and one of the laundry girls, a pale, quiet young woman named Bet Callow, had been observed by Pip taking long routes between the laundry and the house that conveniently passed the eastern gate where Lord Stull's messenger watered his horse each morning. She told the Duke over breakfast, deliberately within possible hearing range, that she intended to spend the morning writing letters and the afternoon in the library. Nothing more. He looked at her across the table with the particular expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of a question. She gave him the smallest possible nod. He drank his tea and said nothing further. Pip took the real letter to Mr. Carver Holt by the South Road, bypassing the household mail entirely. Stull arrived before noon. She heard the carriage. She did not move from her chair in the library. He appeared in the doorway within 10 minutes. His smile was already assembled. Your Grace. Settled in nicely, I see. Lord Stull. She turned a page. The Duke is in the East Fields. I can have someone fetch him if your business requires his presence. Not at all. He moved to the window. I hoped for a moment with you, actually. He turned. I understand you had a look through the late Duke's archive. I did, she said easily. I hoped to find something useful regarding the estate's legal standing. Mostly old farming records and correspondence about roof repairs. Rather a waste of an afternoon. His smile widened carefully. Nothing of a more sensitive nature? Should there have been? She tilted her head with the precise curiosity of a woman who suspected nothing. He left within the hour. She waited until his carriage cleared the gates. Then she walked directly to the East Fields. The Duke came to meet her halfway across the field. He came, he said. He believed it, she replied, or enough of it to stop pressing for now. She paused. He has someone inside. I believe it is Bet Callow, one of the laundry girls. I do not want her dismissed yet. She is more useful in passing him the information we choose to give. He looked at her steadily. You managed all of this alone, this morning. You needed to be genuinely unaware during his visit. It would not have worked otherwise. She held his gaze. I should have told you the full plan earlier. I am sorry for that. Do not apologize for being capable, he said quietly. I have spent 2 years in this fight with no one beside me who understood it. Do not apologize for understanding it. She looked at him a moment longer than she intended. He looked back. They walked to the house together, not close, not touching, but in step with each other in a way that felt longer than the days it had actually been. That evening, a letter arrived from Percival. She opened it with steady hands and cold recognition. It was not an apology. It was a warning. Stull knows you found something. He has men watching the post roads out of Velmore. Whatever you sent, assume it was intercepted. Leave this alone. You do not understand what he is capable of. She allowed herself one moment of real fear, felt it fully, then folded it away. Pip had used the South Road. The letter to Holt was already a day ahead of anything Stull's men could reach, but Percival's warning told her something more useful than he intended. Stull was rattled. Rattled men made mistakes. She found the Duke in the study, standing at the window in the dark, a single lamp on the desk. He read Percival's letter without expression, then set it down. The letter to Holt is safe, she said. South Road. But this tells us Stull is moving faster than we expected. She sat at the desk. We need to bias here. My brother knows our father's papers better than anyone. If there are additional documents, he will know where they would have been kept. I can send a formal invitation, the Duke said. A small household gathering. Tobias arrives as your family. It raises no suspicion. Invite Stull as well, she said. He looked at her. I want him in this house when the inquiry notice from London arrives, she said. I want to see his face when it does. The Duke sat across from her in the lamplight and looked at her with something quieter and more permanent than admiration. When this is over, he said, what do you want? Not from the arrangement. From your life. She was briefly, genuinely, unprepared for the question. I want my brother's future restored, my father's name cleared. She met his eyes. I want to be somewhere I am not positioned or managed or used as a fixture in someone else's plan. You are not a fixture here, he said. You have not been since the first morning you poured tea without asking permission. Something shifted between them. Not dramatically. Quietly and completely, the way seasons change without a single decisive moment. "I know," she said, and it was enough. The gathering was set for a Friday. Invitations went to 12 names: local gentry, 2 magistrates, a retired land commissioner named Sir Polton Graft, who had worked the northern counties during the original boundary dispute, and Lord Gareth Stull. Tobias arrived 2 days early, on horseback, with a leather satchel across his chest and the look of a young man who had not slept in a week. Lucinda met him at the door before the footman could reach it. She held both his hands in hers for a moment and looked at his face. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. "Come inside." She introduced him to the Duke that evening in the study, all 3 of them around the desk with documents between them. Tobias assessed the Duke with careful eyes, listened more than he spoke, and asked 2 precise questions about the boundary filing that told Lucinda he had already been thinking along the same lines she had. The Duke answered both questions directly and without performance. Something in Tobias settled after that. Then Tobias opened his satchel. Inside, wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax, were 4 additional documents their father had kept hidden outside his office entirely. Stored in the lining of an old trunk in the family attic, which Tobias had torn apart, board by board, after her last letter. The Duke held the lamp close, while Lucinda spread them on the desk. The first was a sworn statement from a second Parliament clerk, corroborating Sir Aldous' account of Stull's attempt to alter the boundary filing. The second was a letter from a land commissioner, confirming the original document's integrity and noting, in careful language, that external pressure had been applied to his office during the filing period. The third was a record of payment, partial but traceable, from an account connected to Stull's estate management to a clerk who had since disappeared from public record. The fourth was a note in her father's own handwriting, dated 3 weeks before his first collapse, naming Lord Gareth Stull directly and describing in plain, precise language what he believed Stull intended and feared. Lucinda read her father's handwriting and said nothing for a long time. The Duke put the lamp down and stood quietly. He did not fill the silence with words. He simply let it exist, which was exactly the right thing to do. Tobias put his hand over hers on the desk. She took 1 breath. Then she straightened. "This is enough," she said. "This is more than enough." Friday came with grey skies and cold, clear air. The guests arrived through the afternoon. Sir Polton Graft came first, a small, sharp man in his 70s, who shook the Duke's hand with the grip of someone 30 years younger, and looked around Velmore Hall with the assessing eye of a man who had spent his career reading properties for what they concealed. The 2 magistrates arrived together, serious and punctual. The local gentry filled the drawing room with careful conversation and sidelong glances at Lucinda, who moved through the gathering with composed ease, welcoming each guest by name, remembering details, making each person feel seen. Mrs. Petch had told her that morning, quietly, while overseeing the preparation of the reception room, that she had known Lord Stull for 20 years, and that he had once tried to bribe the late Duke's head gamekeeper into providing false testimony about a property boundary. The gamekeeper had refused and lost his position under unclear circumstances 3 months later. "He will not expect to lose today," Mrs. Petch had said, arranging the centerpiece with deliberate hands. "Men like him never do. That is always their undoing." Lucinda had looked at her. "How long have you known about the documents in the lower archive?" Mrs. Petch had straightened the last flower and looked up. "Long enough to know they needed the right person to find them." She had picked up her tray and walked out without another word. Stull arrived last. He came through the door with his smile and his broad shoulders, and his absolute certainty that every room he entered would yield to him. He greeted the Duke with loud warmth. He greeted the magistrates with easy familiarity. He turned to Lucinda with an expression that was generous on the surface and watchful underneath. "A lovely occasion, Your Grace," he said. "You have transformed this house already." "Houses respond to attention," she said pleasantly, "as do most neglected things." Something flickered in his eyes. The gathering moved through its first hour without incident. Wine was poured. Conversation moved between weather and land, and the usual careful observations of people who had not yet determined what the evening required of them. Then Holt appeared at the drawing-room door and brought the Duke a letter on a silver tray. The room noticed. Rooms always notice when a letter arrives during a social occasion. Conversations paused briefly, then resumed, with the slightly elevated attention of people pretending not to watch. The Duke read it. His expression did not change. He folded it, placed it in his coat, and excused himself from the conversation he was in. He crossed to where Sir Polton Graft stood near the fireplace and spoke to him quietly. Sir Polton's eyebrows rose. He set down his glass. Lucinda watched Stull watching this exchange. She saw the moment he understood that something had shifted. It moved across his face like a shadow crossing ground, there and then controlled, but she caught it. His smile stayed. His eyes went somewhere calculating and cold. He began to move toward the door. "Lord Stull." Lucinda's voice was pleasant and carrying. Every head in the room turned. "Before you go, Sir Polton has just been asking about the northern boundary dispute. I believe you have some history with it. Perhaps you could speak to it directly." The room went very still. Sir Polton turned from the fireplace. The two magistrates exchanged a glance. Tobias, standing near the bookshelf, was absolutely motionless. Stull stopped moving. His smile returned, broader now, the version he used when he needed to buy time. "A tedious old matter," he said. "Resolved years ago." "Is it resolved?" the Duke said from across the room. His voice was calm and quiet and cut through the gathering like a clean line through paper. He withdrew the letter from his coat. "Because I have here a notice from a London solicitor confirming the opening of a formal parliamentary inquiry into the original filing of the Northern Boundary Agreement, specifically into evidence of attempted document alteration and applied financial pressure during the filing period." He looked at Stull steadily. 11 years ago. The room did not move. Stull's smile did not fall. It simply became something else entirely. A mask with nothing warm left behind it. His eyes moved to Lucinda. She met them without expression. "You have no evidence that connects to me," he said. His voice was still controlled, almost convincing. "We have 4 documents," Lucinda said. 2 sworn witness statements, a traceable payment record, and a letter written in my father's hand naming you directly." She paused. "My father, Lord Stull, the man whose health you destroyed, whose practice you dismantled, whose family you positioned around your plans for over a decade." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "He kept very thorough records." Stull looked at the magistrates, then at Sir Polton, then back at the Duke. The calculation behind his eyes ran fast and arrived at its result. There was no move left. Not in this room. Not tonight. Not against this particular arrangement of witnesses and documents, and people who had simply, finally, connected what he had spent years ensuring, remained separate. He left without another word. The room exhaled. Sir Polton crossed to the Duke and extended his hand. "Long overdue," he said simply. Tobias was at Lucinda's side within seconds. He said nothing, just stood next to her, which was everything. Later, when the guests had gone and the house had settled into its late evening quiet, Lucinda sat in the library with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and the particular stillness of someone who has been moving at high speed for days and has only just stopped. The Duke came in without knocking, which she had come to understand was simply how he entered rooms he considered shared space. He sat in the chair across from hers and looked at the fire. They sat in silence for a long time. "Your father would have been proud of tonight," he said. She looked at the fire. He was a quiet man. He would have preferred that none of it had ever been necessary. She paused. "But yes, I think he would have." Another silence, comfortable and unforced. "Lucinda." He said her name with the same plain directness he gave everything. No performance in it. She looked at him. "This arrangement began without honesty," he said. "I would like what comes after it to begin differently." He held her gaze with the steadiness she had come to trust entirely. "I would like you to stay. Not as a fixture, not as a function. As someone who has earned every room in this house, and whose counsel I find I cannot imagine managing without." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the grounds of Velmore Hall lay dark and still under a sky full of cold stars. Somewhere in London, an inquiry had opened. Somewhere, Percival Stowe was calculating the cost of the side he had chosen. Somewhere, Lord Gareth Stull was facing the first wall he had ever hit that he had not built himself. And here, in a library full of books and firelight, a woman who had been sold like a transaction was being asked, for the first time, what she actually wanted. "I will stay," she said. "Not because the arrangement requires it, because I choose to." He nodded once, slowly, as if he had been holding something carefully for a long time and had only just been given permission to set it down. They sat together in the quiet of the library until the fire burned low. Two people who had walked into the same difficult truth from opposite directions and arrived, unexpectedly, at the same place. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was better than that. It was real.